So something else that was believed anciently is that the heavens were perfect. And according to them, if the heavens were perfect, then they must also be unchanging, which means that any sort of change that we see in the sky has to be an earthly thing. For example, think about the weather. The weather comes from the sky, and it's constantly changing. Even clouds are frequently changing, and those are earthly events, part of our atmosphere, part of the air that surrounds us. So any sort of change that we see happening up in the sky has to be earthly and not heavenly. Well, in 1572, there was a sudden change in the sky. Specifically, there was what appeared to be a star that suddenly appeared, and it was so bright it could actually be seen during the day. Now, according to prevailing wisdom at the time, this new thing had to be an atmospheric thing, something like weather, the weirdest weather event that's ever happened ever. Well, there was an astronomer by the name of Tycho Brahe who realized he could actually figure out how far away it was using the idea of parallax. So if you remember to our first lecture set, we talked about parallax, doing the finger experiment. Go ahead and do that again now to refresh. Well, with this idea of parallax, he didn't just blink up at the sky. Clearly, from one side of your face to the other isn't going to be a large enough distance to be able to tell anything about space. But what he realized is he could use the Earth. Okay, so the idea is that he measured the position of the object at one time, and then he measured it again around 12 hours later. So he went from one side of the Earth to the other side of the Earth, giving him a large change of perspective. Well, from that, he figured he'd be able to see that if it's earthly, it will be close, and it should shift significantly compared to the background of stars. Well, when he did this, he found that it did not move compared to the background of stars, which means it had to be as far away as the stars are, and therefore it had to be a heavenly event, not an earthly event. So in this case, he actually used parallax to show that the heavens had to be changing. A few years later, in 1577, there was another sudden change in the sky. In this case, a comet appeared. Okay, so, according to prevailing wisdom at the time, comets had to be some weird atmospheric event. But Tycho Brahe, again, used the same idea of parallax to figure out whether it was close or far. And again, it didn't shift compared to the background of stars, so it had to be very far away. It had to be heavenly. So Brahe now has two instances in which he can show that the heavens have changed. And I know what you're thinking. This means that some bad stuff actually happened to him. He was chased down by the church or something like that. In this case, that did not happen. The King of Denmark actually heard about his work and was so impressed, he built him not one, but two observatories so that he would be able to continue his work studying the heavens. Now, something that I want to point out is that using these observatories, Brahe actually made very accurate naked eye observations of the planets. Now, what I mean by naked eye is that there were no telescopes. The telescope had not yet been invented during Tycho Brahe's time. Now, he still had some instruments. If you're familiar with sextants, he probably had a sextant and some other things to help have very accurate measure. But there were no telescopes at the time. So the two things you need to remember about Tycho Brahe is that he was able to show that the heavens were imperfect and changing, and two, that he made very accurate measurements of the motions of the planets.